Good morning and Shabbat Shalom. This is Valley Beth Shalom Torah study for a Shabbos morning. I'm Rabbi Feinstein, joined this morning, as always, by my dear friend, the Chief Rabbi of Aspen, Colorado, and of South Florida, Rabbi Marc Gellman. Good morning, Marc. How you doing?
Good. Good Shabbos, Ed.
Good Shabbos and good Chodesh. It's the beginning of a new month, and this is a very, very special month. This is the month of Nissan. So you have 2 weeks until Pesach. The Seder will be 2 weeks from last night. And 2 weeks to go and find matzah, maror, and charoset, as well as all of the other specialties of the holiday. So this morning, I'd like to direct our conversation to that reality, because this Rosh Chodesh is a very special one. It's listed in the Torah very specially. And the beginning of the Passover story, the real beginning of the Exodus, is told from this date, from Rosh Chodesh Nissan, and that's what we're going to be commemorating in Shul today. It's Shabbos, it's Rosh Chodesh, and it's Shabbat Chodesh, the Sabbath that recognizes the coming of the new month. In ancient Israel, this is when people began their journey, their pilgrimage to the Beit HaMikdash, to Jerusalem and to the Holy Temple, to offer their Pesach sacrifice and join the celebration, the communal celebration in Jerusalem. So this particular Rosh Chodesh is listed in the Torah. And the chapter that I'd like to devote our attention to this morning, is chapter 12 of Exodus. I'll put it up on the screen so that everybody could read it with us. So the scene here is we have had 9 plagues, and the 10th is about to come. And we have had this rhythm of the plagues coming. Each plague is announced by Moses and Aaron, and then Pharaoh begs them to take it away and tells them to leave and changes his mind. And this goes on 9 times through blood and frogs and gnats and all the other things. And finally, this last one comes. And before the 10th plague, so it's 3 sets of 3. And now before the next one, the rhythm stops. And this chapter is inserted in the story. And it's a very strange chapter. It's sort of a time out of time chapter, because it's going to deal with issues that are forever issues before we even have the Exodus. You're going to talk about how to remember the Exodus before the Exodus actually happens, right? So it's a very strange, the time frame of this chapter is kind of warped, but it's a very interesting statement. So let's learn together. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall mark for you the beginning of months."
Okay, right there we have our first issue.
Yes.
It's not Rosh Hashanah,
Right.
and yet it's the first of the months. How do we reconcile that, Rabbi?
Well, this is actually a wonderful story. So for the Bible, the calendar begins in Nissan, because Nissan is the month of our Exodus, which is the principal event that defines us as a people.
Right.
It isn't until we go into exile in 586 BCE, or actually 10 years before that, when the first exile comes, and a large community of Israelites, of Jews, are settled in Babylon, that we adopt the Babylonian custom of beginning the year at Tishrei, in the fall. In other words, Jews in Babylon living in exile had a hard time dating their checks, Nissan, and so in order to get their checks cashed, they had to adopt the Babylonian calendar, which shows you that we have always been a people ready to adjust our custom to the environment in which we live, our language, our dress, our custom, as long as it doesn't threaten the core values of the community. So Rosh Hashanah is the first of the year for the Babylonian calendar. It became the first of the year for our calendar. And the Mishnah the Talmud tries to reconcile this by saying there's actually 4 Rosh Hashanahs in the course of the year for different purposes. In the same way, for example, in American life, you have a fiscal year that might begin on July 1st or October 1st. You have a tax year that begins on April 15th. The Mishnah says there are these different kinds of New Years, but it's very clear what happened. Rosh Chodesh Nissan was supposed to be Rosh Hashanah. But when we moved to Babylon, we adopted their calendar. Now, why is Rosh Chodesh Nissan the beginning of the year? Because this is the beginning, this is the event that makes us who we are. The Exodus narrative is the master narrative of the Jewish people.
Well, let me just add one thing to that, is my understanding, which was that It was this brilliant Jewish adaptation of pagan customs into a non-pagan environment, into Judaism. The pagan custom is the new year begins with new life, new growth in the spring. So we take that rhythm, which everyone knows, the springtime is the time for rebirth and the time for the new year. And we say, yeah, but it isn't agricultural anymore. Now it's about a historical event, which has its rootings in not in the eternally recurring cycles of nature, but in the onward progression of history.
And that is a very important observation, that in pagan culture, actually in world culture, according to Joseph Campbell, the most common symbol is the circle. The circle, and thinking of life as a circle, thinking of history as a circle, thinking of our experience as a circle, is the most common myth, common structure of time for human cultures, because what it says is there's birth and growth and maturity and decay and death, and then out of death comes rebirth. The myth of the phoenix, the rebirth, call this the great Mandela, the great wheel of life. If you have any kids who watch Disney movies, it's the wheel of life. It's the Song of the Lion King movie, right? The circle of life, the wheel of fortune. The son takes the place of the dead father, and long live the king. And this idea that life is a circle, that experience is a circle, that history inevitably repeats itself, is a great idea. It offers the comfort that there is really no such thing as death, because out of death comes rebirth. And you can see how many cultures are based on that idea. There's only one problem with it. The problem with it, first of all, it works for the species, not for the individual. I'm born, I grow, I mature, I die, and I'm gone. I can appreciate investing myself in my kids, but in a sense, I'm not reborn. But deeper than that, if life is a circle and experience is and always repeating itself, then there's nothing new under the sun. Ecclesiastes was right. There's nothing new because there's nothing novel, because we're destined to repeat the same mistakes generation after generation. So comes along the Torah, and while it doesn't deny the circle as the natural time frame, nature is circles. It's winter, spring, summer, fall, winter, spring, summer, fall. It says that in human experience, life is a line. Experience is a line. And the image here is the journey. And the Torah is a road story. It's the journey from Egypt to Canaan, from the house of bondage to the promised land. And when you're on a journey, there's the question of, are we making progress or regress? Right. What can I add to the journey? How can I advance the process? And so, this is the beginning of time, as Rabbi Gellman just points out, is deeply ironic because it is the embrace of the pagan cycle of the new, and at the same time, it's the month in which we begin the journey. We live in both lines and circles, and that's what this time frame is going to be about. Let's see what happens in the structure, in the story. Ready? Speak to the whole community of Israel and say to them that on the 10th of this month, each of them shall take a lamb to a family, a lamb to a household. But if the household is too small, then let him share one with a neighbor. You contribute to the lamb, and the lamb shall be without blemish, a yearling. You may take it from the sheep or the goats. You watch over it until the 14th of the month. Everyone shall slaughter it at twilight. So this was the first Passover. Buy a lamb by the 10th of the month, live with it for a couple of days, and on the 14th, then you should slaughter it. Then take the blood and put it on the two doorposts and the lintel of the house in which they are to eat it. And they shall eat the flesh. You're going to cook the lamb, you're going to roast it, and you're going to eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Now, here the time frame gets a little wacky, because this is the first of the month. He's talking to them on the first of the month, and he's telling them, in 2 weeks, I want you to have this lamb ready. And in 2 weeks, I want you to have a dinner. And in 2 weeks, I want you to eat roast lamb with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Now, wait a minute. The purpose for the unleavened bread was because they didn't have time for the bread to rise. But if they already knew 2 weeks ahead that they were leaving, they should have had bread for that night, right? And why bitter herbs? Don't eat of it raw or cooked in any way, but eat the whole thing, roast it over the fire. Don't leave any till morning, because this is well before tinfoil was invented. And this is how you'll eat it: your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you'll eat it hurriedly. It is the Passover offering to the Lord. Now, the question, Rabbi Gellman, is God talking to Moses in that generation, or is God talking to us?
God's talking to us. There's no question about it. But I think I have a line on the reason, your wonderful question about why take the lamb into your house? Why not just get a lamb and bring it over to the sacrifice?
And why on the 10th of the month and not on the 13th? You can go to the market the night before Pesach and pick up a lamb, you know.
Exactly. So I think I have a sense of that. It's about the depth of sacrifice. So the concept here is you're supposed to sacrifice something that you have attachment to. Otherwise, it's just a commercial transaction. Yeah, here's some money, get that, and we'll take it to the temple. But if you have a lamb who's cute, it's in your house for a few days, and and the kids attached to it, and
they name it. They name it.
They name it, right?
You know, it's Bob the Lamb, you know.
Exactly.
Lammy.
Mary had a little lamb.
Mary had a little lamb.
Right. Exactly. And so you have that, but then you give that up. So there's a real sense of pain and loss, which is essential for any true sacrifice, which is what the Cain and Abel sacrifice story hinges on. Why did God, pick Abel's? Because he brought the finest of his flocks, and Cain just brought the produce of the field. So meaning it's rotting in the field. What the heck? I'll give it to God. So the lesson there and the lesson here, I think, is coherent. It means I want you to understand true sacrifice. And this is the beginning of habituating people to one of the great truths of sacrifice. If it isn't something that deprives you by giving it, it isn't a sacrifice.
That sounds reasonable. I want to add one more point, though.
Yeah.
Let's think about this in two contexts, for them and for us. So let's think about the Israelites who are hearing this. What are they being asked to do? They are slaves. They're living in slave quarters. They're under the thumb of an authoritarian, totalitarian government, which is brutally violent. It's, after all, throwing babies into the Nile at the moment, right? And what are they being told to do? They're being told on the 1st of the month that by the 10th of the month, they're to go find a lamb, and they can share it with their neighbors. They're to slaughter the lamb on the night of the 14th, which is Erev Pesach. That's next 2 weeks Friday night, right? They're to take the blood and smear it on the lintel. Now, we know how the story ends. We know that God's coming through the land to destroy the firstborn of Egypt. We know that that night we're going to leave Egypt, but they don't know that. And what does it mean to smear blood on the lintel and say, I am a Jew who believes that there's a God who's more powerful than Pharaoh? This is a political statement of some weight. You are coming out. You are declaring yourself. You are telling the world who you are and what you believe. And you wonder whether Israelites who were a little skeptical, a little pessimistic, 280 years of slavery will make you a pessimist, were wondering, and what if he doesn't come? And what if the destroyer doesn't come? What if the angel doesn't come? What if the plague doesn't? I'm going to wake up in the morning and their Pharaoh's police going to be waiting for me in front of my house.
Beautiful. That's a great Russia. I love that.
Listen to the news now.
Coming out of the Jewish people.
Right. Listen to the news now about people in Russia who have stepped out to say that the war that Russia's conducting in Ukraine is immoral, and what's happening to them. And that's exactly what the Israelites are being asked to do. Declare yourself, come out of the closet, tell the world you believe there's a power bigger than Pharaoh, and pray that that miracle is actually going to happen. And what's interesting is that, they were just spectators to the plagues. They didn't do anything to bring the plagues.
That's right.
Moses shows up.
Yeah.
Moses is confronting Pharaoh. The plagues are coming down from heaven, frogs and all the other things, right? This is the first time they're asked to participate as active participants, active agents in their own liberation. But it's so risky, and it's so vulnerable, and it's so scary. I met many, many years ago, I was at a conference I was invited to, of all places, a conference in Germany, in Berlin. Mm-hmm. And I met an elderly woman who was one of a group called the White Rose.
Sure.
A group of German college students who stood up against Hitler.
Most of them were killed.
And yes, all of her friends were killed. And she talked to us with, you want to hug and kiss and embrace this lady's courage, this woman's courage and her strength and her vision and her virtue. And at the same time, you got to wonder, my God, where does courage like that come from? That's what's being asked here.
Yes, I agree. Remember, we've talked often about how the great challenge of the Exodus, I would say ultimately the great tragedy of the Exodus, because it isn't completed, is take the dual task, taking the people out of Egypt and taking Egypt out of the people. So right here in your beautiful drasha there, I love that. What we have is the first indication of what it's going to take to get Egypt out of you. What it's going to take is you have to have affirmation of yourself as a member of the Jewish people. You can't just be dragged along. Why didn't God do this? Why didn't God? You have to say, I am proud. I am proud to be a member of an oppressed people, a slave people. All you have to read is some of the really beautiful old books of the 60s and the revolutionary consciousness of Black people, like Eldridge Cleaver's book, Soul on Ice, where he talks about his transformation of becoming a proud Black man. And it happens to everyone who is enslaved. Every people who is enslaved, they have to transform their identity into something new, which is a self-affirmation in which they aren't defined by their slave status. They are now defined by their positive connection.
Assert agency.
Yes.
My own power to control the conditions of my existence.
And I love your point. I love your point about what was the point of the blood on the lintels, right? Like if Santa Claus can come down the chimney and know, oh, this is a Christian house. What, the Malach HaMavis didn't know this was a Jewish house?
You better not cry. You better not shout. Right? That was the question my kids used to ask at the Seder. Abba, if Santa Claus can find all the Christian kids' house on Hanukkah, why can't we on Christmas? Why didn't God know where the Jews lived?
So it can't be for the Malach HaMavis, which is
for us.
It's for us. That's a wonderful switch. I love that switch.
It's for us. It's an assertion of something within us. Now, even by the way, today, see, when I read this, one of the things that occurred to me, Marc, is that we kept some of these rituals. We don't have the sacrifice anymore because the temple's gone. We have a bone on the plate, but we do eat the unleavened bread and we do eat the bitter herbs. And I know lots of people who come to the Seder dressed in travel clothes because they want to make tent. Why don't we put the blood on the lintel anymore? If that was that ritual meant just for that generation, or was that ritual meant for all generations? And what an interesting new addition to Pesach ritual. You got to go to Home Depot on the 10th of the month and buy a can of red paint and a paintbrush, and you're to paint red stuff across your lintel, your doorpost. Yeah. But here's the question, Marc. How many Jewish families would be afraid to do that today in America?
Well, for one basic reason, red clashes with most of the color schemes.
Oh, come on. But how many, I'm serious, even in neighborhoods
like they wouldn't do it.
Even in neighborhoods like yours and mine,
yes,
where there's a lot of Jewish people.
Well, what do you think a mezuzah
people
is?
would say, no, I don't want to do it.
Eddie, the mezuzah.
Right.
How many Jews have mezuzahs on their house?
Yes,
A
and
lot.
I once had a real estate guy ask me, "Is that a Jewish burglar alarm?" You know, and I said, "Yeah, you better not. Yeah, we're protected by a higher authority, right?"
That's funny.
But that's
Yeah,
think
I
about
think it's.
coming out of the closet, as it were.
I used to give a little lecture to the teenagers before bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs on Jewish jewelry. It was a whole lecture to them on stuff you should do as a Jew. And one of them, I said, you should get some Jewish jewelry. And I said, I think it's a big deal when you wear a chai.
Hmm.
I think it's a big deal. And I think you should be proud to wear some symbol of your Jewishness. And, you know, when you look at what we gave up from Orthodox dress, the yarmulke, the tzitzis, and the payas,
Etc. Right.
you look and you see, yeah, some of it was that this didn't fit our own personal beliefs, but some of it was, wait, we just didn't want to stand out.
Yeah.
Because we could pass as white people in a culture where whites have privilege.
Mm-hmm.
We could pass. So I think that the blood on the doorpost may be the first, it's certainly the first active thing that the slaves had to do.
Right.
And it's the message. Getting out of here is easy. Getting here out of you is not going to be so easy.
Now, take a look at this ritual again. Let's look even more carefully at this, okay?
Okay.
So he says, speak to the whole community, take this lamb, right? And then he tells them, you'll take the blood and put it on the lintel. Then you'll eat the flesh of it, roast it over a fire, right? Eat it with unleavened bread and with bitter herbs. This is how you'll eat it. Your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, your staff in your hand. You'll eat it hurriedly. It is a Passover offering to the Lord. Now, there's two things I'd like to point out. First of all, it is a Passover offering to the Lord. Well, but that makes no sense because this is 2 weeks before the Pesach happened. Now, if that sentence meant anything to those who heard it the first time, as the story imagines, then they already have to have an idea of what a Passover offering to the Lord is. So there is a theory among biblical scholars that this too was a pagan festival. It was a pagan shepherd's festival. Pesach was a pagan shepherd's festival. At the time of the birthing of lambs, you slaughtered a lamb and ate it in this way to keep the evil spirits away from your flocks, and that the tradition assimilated this because otherwise they wouldn't have understood what that phrase meant. It isn't until later that it's explained that God passed over the houses. But here it hasn't happened for 2 weeks yet. That's the first interesting thing. But the second interesting thing, let's leave that aside for a moment. Let's go to where we are now. Notice what you're told to do. You're told to be at home. This is not a ritual which takes place in the synagogue. This is not a ritual which takes place in the temple. This is the temple of Beit HaMikdash. This is a ritual which takes place at home, among families. Family is to gather together and take a lamb and roast it and eat it. It's a family ritual to take place at home. It's a meal. It's a meal. It's a feast. You're to have a feast. All right, why a feast and why at home? And with bitter herbs and unleavened bread. So when the temple of Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 CE, the rabbis didn't want to discontinue the holiday, even though they really should have, because they couldn't offer the sacrifice anymore. What they did was they went back to the biblical roots of it and said, have a feast at home with unleavened bread and bitter herbs, and you can't have the sacrifice, but have roast lamb. And for 1,000 years, we ate roast lamb at the table, and many Jews still do to this day. Then around the year 1000, they switched the custom. So what's really interesting is the chutzpah of the rabbis when the temple is destroyed, not to discontinue the holiday, but to refocus it. And the symbol of that is, you remember in the Haggadah, just before we eat dinner, there's a statement from Rabbi Gamliel. He's the rabbi who's leading the community in the generation after the destruction. And he says you ought to talk about three things at the Seder: Pesach, Matzah, Maror. Notice what he did. He equated the three. The sacrifice is the most important thing. Matzah and Maror, unleavened bread and bitter herbs, are side dishes. But he says, no, they're just as important. And if you don't have Pesach, that's okay, because you still have matzah and maror. That's where we get the ritual that we have now. That's where we get our ritual. Now, that's how they interpret it. So let's go back to that question. Rabbi Gellman, for 1,000 years, we ate roast lamb as a memory of the sacrifice that was offered in the Holy Temple, which itself is a memory of what our ancestors did the night they left Egypt. But we don't eat roast lamb.
No.
Brisket, chicken, turkey,
Yeah.
vegetarian stuff in my family. Why not roast lamb? When did roast lamb leave us?
Well, there's several theories about this, that it was a pagan animal and that we didn't want to replicate pagan practices. I don't buy that, because it wasn't really a pagan animal. Pigs were, but lambs weren't. And the other theory, my theory, which surprisingly is the one I agree with, is that basically it was the Christian thing. That because Jesus is referred to as the Lamb of God, and Jesus was sacrificed in Christian belief for the sins of the world, you have this connection between the Lamb and Jesus. And because Jews didn't want to be seen as replicating any Christian meme, they said, look, enough with the lamb. We're not having lamb anymore. We're going to do other things. And that, I think, is the theory of it, that it was an attempt to distance the Jewish community from Christian beliefs about Jesus.
So let me ask you, so the lamb is taken out, and around the time of the First Crusade. So your theory about defending the community from aggressive Christian attack makes a great deal of sense. But there's something missing from this story. We have the lamb, and we have the unleavened bread, and we have the matzah, we have the maror, the bitter herb. We don't have wine. When did wine become? Remember, it's 4 cups of wine in the story. And the Seder is organized around 4 cups of wine. And
because of the 4 promises.
Well, but when did that enter into the?
That's
Seder?
rabbinic.
That's rabbinic.
And that's what they look. People have got to realize here, this was invented from whole cloth. The rabbi, there was no Haggadah. They wrote the Haggadah. There was no, and the Passover meal, as it.
Maxwell House wrote the Haggadah. Come on.
Maxwell did. Yes, they did. I think they still distribute those Haggadahs.
I hope not. It would be a great gift to the Jewish people if they didn't.
I don't know, but you know, that idea that what we practice in traditional Judaism and throughout Judaism today is what has always been in Judaism is just simply not true. Right. Judaism innovated and developed and changed, and this idea that conservative and reform Reconstructionist Jews are doing the wrong thing because they're changing Judaism is the worst canard. It's not historical. It isn't. It's cruel, and it's, I think, ultimately anti-Jewish. It's not the way we were. We always changed. We always innovated, and the rabbis had to cope with the greatest of all the changes, which was the end of biblical Judaism, the end of the priesthood, the end of sacrificing animals. Mm-hmm. And as you and I have spoken, they made a decision that they were going to make prayers replace the sacrifices. So the Musaf prayer is a replacement for the Musaf sacrifice, and the Shacharit prayer is a replacement for the morning sacrifice. But it doesn't work. What they did ultimately doesn't work, because a prayer is not the same as taking that beautiful little lamb into your house from the 10th to the 14th and then
Offering,
either watching it or sending it off to see. I don't want to describe what they do to it, but in the end, it's meat and it's not a lamb. And that is a real sacrifice. And I think this Pesach, in our meditations around our Seder tables, we should, of course, give praise and thanks to all the rabbis mentioned in the Haggadah who recreated a religion that had basically been destroyed by the Romans. And also, we need to reflect on what does that old Judaism, biblical Judaism, what did they get right that we still need to learn about? We're not sacrificing animals, but we need to learn from them the spirit of sacrifice. The spirit of sacrifice that it hasn't evaporated at all from the Jewish community. We're still tremendously gracious and giving people, but still, this is a selfish culture and a secular culture. And I think the stories of the Passover, instead of being focused on that was then, we did all that then, and now we don't do any of that, throws out the baby with the bathwater. And the baby, the jewel in our crown, is sacrifice.
Well, I want to take one more piece of it, though, because I want to pay attention to something that might be too obvious for us even to see. The other thing that they gave us, and the rabbis took this from the Bible, is the meal, and that it's a family meal.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why Passover is the most popular Jewish holiday. According to all the studies, 90-something% of Jews participate in a Passover Seder. Now, I don't know how much of the Seder they do, but they at least sit down to a dinner. And the dinner is a tangible expression of a family solidarity, of a community solidarity. It's a meal. It's a meal celebrated at home. It's a meal with a set of rituals. And what's wonderful about this is if we see a little bit later in the Torah text, I can put it up on the screen. Just go down a little bit, right? Moses is going to summon the people and he's going to tell them what to do and give them the exact same ritual we just talked about, right? And when you enter the land that the Lord will give you, as he's promised, you will observe this rite. In other words, this isn't just this one time. I want you to do this every year. I want you to recreate this last night in Egypt every year. Pesach, the Seder night, is a recreation, a reiteration, a rehearsal of our last night in Egypt. Tomorrow we're going to be free. Tonight we're still slaves. It's the last night. And when your children ask you, what do you mean by this rite? So you'll recognize that. 4 times in the Torah, there's this phrase, when your kid asks you. When your kid asks you, and that's where you get that midrash of the 4 sons, the 4 children. This happens to be the simple ones question. But you'll notice it's not simple here. It's actually embedded right into the ritual. When your kid asks you, why are we doing this? You'll say it is the Pesach to the Lord because he passed over our houses in Egypt when he smote the Egyptians and he saved our homes. So it is a home ritual, it is a meal, it is tangible, it is a family ritual, and children are to have a key role in it. The asking of questions is already anticipated by the Torah. Now we have different questions, manishtana, we scripted the question for the kid. But the asking of questions is something that the Torah already anticipates. It has a pedagogic function. And that's what makes it such a wonderful ritual. It is the way
perfect. Eddie, it's perfect. The Seder is perfect. The meal, it's a perfect thing. It has everything in it. I think it's our crowning ritual achievement.
Yeah.
It has belief. It's not just do this, do that. It's here's the meaning of this. What is the meaning of this? There aren't any other rituals we do where we're focused and forced communally to ask, what is the meaning of this matzah? Hold it up and show, what is the meaning of this bitter herb? And so it has belief to teach people that we aren't just doers of rituals we don't understand. We're believers in God and believers in God's ability to save us from every Egypt we will ever be cast into, and from every despair that we ever suffer. It also has a role for children, not just they're at the table, but we can't do the Seder without them. And we can't get the Afikomen usually without them. And the youngest ones, asks the fear kashas. And so it's a perfect ritual. And I'm proud of it, but it's still, I think the core of it still needs to be revived. And that core is sacrifice. And let me, since I'm the interfaith guy here in our interfaith situation, Saturday night is the beginning of Ramadan, the month of Ramadan. And for our Muslim brothers and sisters. And one of the 5 pillars of Islam is zakat, which is charity, and giving money during the month of Ramadan. And they're serious about that sacrifice, that 2.5% of your gross income before taxes has got to be given away. And they're serious about doing it. And their fast, I'm not saying it's better or worse than ours, but okay, it's better. Because what they're doing, they're saying from sundown to sundown, they eat the meal before dawn, and then they don't eat until after the sun is set.
Yeah.
And it's really, really a big time deal with them. And by the way, to add one more note of observation and praise about what Islam got right, and that is they never had this problem of mixing holidays with agriculture. There's nothing agricultural about Ramadan. And the proof of it is that it's the only holiday of any major faith that's on a pure lunar calendar.
Yeah. So
every year it's 11 days, because the 12 lunar months are 11 days shorter than the solar calendar. So every year it's 11 days earlier. And there's a wonderful blessing in Islam. May you celebrate Ramadan in every season of the year. So they emancipated their belief system from the pagan roots of agriculture. So I want to wish a Ramadan Mubarak, a happy Ramadan to both of our Muslim students who listen, and to friends of ours who will have a very holy month coming up right now.
And for Jews, this time of year is very special.
Yes.
Because Passover is one of those holidays you really need to prepare for, right? The Yiddish phrase of machen Pesach, you got to make Pesach happen.
Yeah.
Start cleaning, you start cooking, you start preparing, you start inviting. The Torah itself says you take a lamb per household, but it anticipated that there'd be too much lamb, because a lamb is a gesundte animal. So you're supposed to invite others over. So this is the time of year you begin to, you start doing that preparation. And I think what's really beautiful there is the Hasidic tradition did something nice to it. It said that that the preparation for Pesach outward should be a symbol for a preparation of Pesach inward. That in the same way that you're going and looking for crumbs and leftovers that are stuck between couch cushions, one is supposed to look within and to find all that is soured and rotten and crummy within and sweep it out, so that on Pesach we begin with a clean heart, the same way we do 6 months from now on Yom Kippur. And I think that's a really nice idea.
That's a beautiful idea.
And I think the idea, as well as you've said, is that in place of the Pesach sacrifice, to find a cause in the world that means something specifically to you, and to go and give something to that cause, time, energy, money, and give to that cause, so that when you come to the table 2 weeks from now for the Seder, you will have made your own Pesach sacrifice. You will have offered something to the world in the name of God, an act that is godly, and that will bring a deeper meaning to the Pesach that you celebrate.
I couldn't agree more. And in fact, we have a ritual like Zakat for the Muslims. which is where I think they got it, and that's Maos Kittim. The truth is, during this holiday, you're supposed to give wheat money, which is money to the poor who couldn't afford to get the flour they needed to make matzahs. So this is a time of charitable giving, and hopefully in your Passover celebrations to all our students, there'll be a way for you to include those who sleep in the dust and those who are in need of an emancipation from their own Egypt.
Well, thank you, Mark, and thank you to everyone for sharing this morning with us. Just a couple of program notes following this Torah study. Of course, we will have Shabbat morning services from Valley Beth Shalom, and you're all invited to join us for Shachrit and Hallel and Rosh Chodesh prayers. This coming tonight at 6 o'clock, of course, in person and online. Tomorrow online at 8:30 and at 6, and all during the week at 7:30 in the morning and 6 o'clock, both in person and online at Valley Beth Shalom. This coming week, several events to get us ready for Pesach. On Tuesday evening, which is April the 5th, we're going to have a briefing from HIAS. HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, is the largest and most important, most powerful Jewish refugee settlement organization in the world, has always been a remarkable help to those who are seeking refuge, first Jews and now as Jews helping others. And HIAS is going to be talking to us about what's going on in the Ukraine and the neighboring countries. What's the prospect for those millions of refugees from this horrifying war, and what we can do to help. That's on Tuesday night. Wednesday night, we will continue with our College of Jewish Studies. Our topic has been Israeli culture, and our guest is Professor Ethan Pack of UCLA, and he's going to do the second half of his presentation on Israeli identity portrayed through Israeli literature. So please join us 7 o'clock on Zoom, also on Facebook and YouTube. If you didn't hear part one, it's a great time to jump into part two. You won't miss anything. It's a wonderful presentation. And then on Thursday night, the VBS Sisterhood is doing a presentation on the heroines, the women involved in the Seder story. It's here in person. Includes a wine tasting for Pesach wines, which is worth coming to. So join us for that. Next Friday night is Rimonim, our musical service. Next Shabbos morning, God willing, Rabbi Gellman will join me, and we will do our annual pre-Pesach event. We will be doing a session on the Haggadah. So I know you want to talk about Parshas Mitzorah, Mark, but I'm not going to let you do it.
Oh man, leprosy. Where's our leprosy discussion?
That's what the Torah is in. But we're going to do the Haggadah next week. So everything you wanted to know, all the secrets of the Haggadah. And I will be doing a Pesach preparation session the following Wednesday night, the 13th, to follow up and to deepen our understanding of the Haggadah. Of course, on the 15th in the morning is the Siyum, the fast of the firstborn. We are allowed to dismiss that fast with some learning. So we'll do some learning in the morning, and on the 15th in the evening is Seder night. So we want to wish everybody a good Shabbos, a good Chodesh, a good new month of Nissan. Pesach is coming. Pack your bags. We're leaving Egypt, folks. Get ready to leave. Mark, pack your bags. You're leaving Egypt.
That's the deal.
Have a good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos, everyone. Good Shabbos, Eddie.